This is Dave, and I'm here with Ethan, and together we are Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast, episode 171-inch.
On this episode, we dig deep into my archives, and we air part one of my interview with Dr. Demento from August 2015.
It's Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast.
It's a podcast about Weird Al.
It's Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast.
Seriously, the whole podcast is about Weird Al.
Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast.
You don't have to listen, but we're glad you are.
Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast.
Welcome everybody to episode 171-inch, and welcome everybody to September.
Ah, yes, September. That means the summer's over, and we can finally start wearing white again.
No, Ethan, the saying is not to wear white after Labor Day.
Oh, crud. I always mix that up.
Well, don't worry about it and just do what I do and take all of your fashion advice from Weird Al lyrics. You know, Perform This Way has a lot of really good pointers, including the one about wearing white after Labor Day.
Oh, good call, Dave. Thanks for that reminder. I totally should be getting all my fashion advice from Weird Al.
By the way, can we talk about something from our last episode?
Sure, but let me guess. You want to listen back to the entire last episode where we watch the Weird the Al Yankovic story trailer with UH Jeff and dissect it piece by piece like it's Avengers Endgame, and then dissect our episode piece by piece like it's the Zapruder film.
Now that would be kind of fun, but I'm not sure we have time for all of that in addition to the Dr. Demento interview that we're going to hear this episode. But actually, I wanted to talk about the big news that Grammy Award-winning Jim Kimo West was getting ready to drop last week.
Oh, yeah, we have a huge update to share on that. So without further ado, it's time for what's happening in Grammy Award-winning Jim Kimo West-related news.
Last episode, we shared the cryptic teaser that the Grammy Award-winning Jim Kimo West shared with his email list about the big news and a hint that was coming last week.
Well, we still haven't seen any news of this announcement or the hint, and when reached for comment on the matter, Grammy Award-winning Jim Kimo West said, "Sorry, slight delay, LOL."
You can always trust Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast as the number one source for breaking Jim Kimo West related news as it develops in real time.
And now, in Burrito related news.
This episode is brought to you in part by vegan burrito restaurant Burrito in Troy, New York, home of the 2-pound double wrapped in a quesadilla Burrito and Wizard Burger in Albany, New York. Come on down to Burrito and Burrito your Burrito, or hop on over to Wizard Burger for mouth-watering, loaded, dare I say beefy, vegan burgers. From Troy to Albany to Uranus, Burrito and Wizard Burger feed the hungry with out-of-this-world plant-based real food, always vegan style. Visit burritosquare.com and wizardburger.com to order ahead.
And now it's time for what's happening in Weird Al related news. What's happening in Weird Al related news is brought to you in part by Well, and the true legends of the once great forum Wowway, in accordance with support for the rights of gays and LGBTQ+, and people who wash their hands regularly. Thanks, Mark Heidenreich, for the sponsorship.
From a source close to New York Comic Con, we have been told that Weird Al will not be appearing in person at the Weird panel at 4 p.m. on October 9th, but instead will be zooming in due to his tour schedule.
It's our understanding that Daniel Radcliffe, Evan Rachel Wood, and Eric Appel will all be there in person.
Also, we share in the disappointment of Weird Al fans across the globe that Ethan and I will not be the ones hosting this panel. We agree that this is an oversight, and we too hope that it will be rectified.
Last weekend, Al tweeted out, "It amuses me to no end that this is currently the number 3 Google search under my name," along with a screenshot showing Weird Al and Madonna showing up as a search suggestion.
This comes just days after our very own Ethan Ullman mentioned that it was trending on episode 170-inch of Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast. Is that a coincidence?
Now, this next Weird Al related news item comes from my very own grandma.
Oh, your grandma, the one who recorded a strings-attached bonus centimeter episode with you?
No, my other grandma.
Oh, in that case, please, we must hear this news.
On the Game Show Network, they are currently airing reruns of the Michael Strahan-hosted $100,000 Pyramid Game Show. The promos for the show on the network feature a clip of Weird Al from his appearance on season 1 of the show.
Very, very cool. You know, I still think that Weird Al was robbed on that show.
Really? Why do you say that, Dave?
Well, he should have been the one to win the money, not the contestants.
If you're interested in seeing Weird Al's appearance on the $100,000 Pyramid, we were able to verify that his episode is currently available to watch on Hulu.
This one goes out to all the Weird Al collectors. This month's issue of Bust magazine features a piece on Weird Al, and his name is on the cover.
The issue is the one with Regina Hall on the cover.
But anyway, I was kind of thinking, what is Bust all about? Is it like people getting arrested?
Actually, I think it has something to do with...
And finally, as we previously reported, Weird, the Al Yankovic story, will make its world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival tomorrow, Thursday, September 8th.
The film will make its premiere at the Royal Alexandra Theatre as part of the Toronto International Film Festival's Midnight Madness series, and it's expected to feature a Q&A with some of the stars and creatives behind the film.
Now, there are 2 additional public showings scheduled for the festival, one of which happens the following day, Friday, September 9th, and the other on September 18th. And as of this recording, all 3 screenings are sold out.
Nonetheless, we are thrilled to announce that both Dave and I have secured tickets to the midnight premiere.
We are very, very excited to finally see this film that we've been talking about for months.
Now, don't worry, we'll definitely tell you all about what it was like to attend the world premiere of Weird the Al Yankovic story. Of course, when the timing is right.
And don't worry, we will continue to keep all of our Inch episodes spoiler-free until at least November 4th, when the film is more widely available to the public.
Now, this past week, the real Dr. Demento tweeted a link to the Weird the Al Yankovic story trailer, along with the message, Rainn Wilson shows the world my true dementia.
To celebrate Dr. Demento and Rainn Wilson's portrayal of him in Weird the Al Yankovic story, Ethan has agreed to share another one of his interviews from his former radio show, Alternative to Sleeping with Ethan Allman. So Ethan, what can you tell us about this interview with Dr. Demento?
So, Alternative to Sleeping was my radio show when I was in college and for a few years following, and I hosted it for nearly 7 years. So, along with interviewing comedians and comedy musicians and other celebrities, I would also play funny music and recordings of stand-up comedy each week. So in 2015, when I did decide to end Alternative to Sleeping, the idea came to me to ask Dr. Demento himself to be on the final episode ever. Without Dr. Demento leading the way and playing funny music on the radio, and essentially creating the format that I was using, there was no way there could have been an alternative to Sleeping with Ethan Allman. I thought it would be incredibly apropos to have my final interview ever be with the man himself.
All right, Ethan, you recorded this 7 years ago, back in August 2015, and it aired on the final episode of your radio show. I was so very excited to hear this. Take it away, 2015 Ethan, with part 1 of your interview with Dr. Demento.
You're listening to Alternative to Sleeping with Ethan Allman here in WCDB Albany 90.9 FM and Comedy Pipe Radio, and I'm very excited to welcome, this guy is the inventor of comedy radio, so the most apropos final guest ever. There's no one better than the great, the legendary Dr. Demento. How's it going, Dr. D?
Oh, real fine. Woo! Woo! Wind up your radio. Hello, Albany. Hello, Comedy Pipe Radio. Hello, Ethan.
Hey, thank you so much for doing this. This is really, truly an honor to be speaking with you.
Same here, Ethan.
Yeah, it's so I've been doing the show for 7 years, not quite as long as you've been doing your show, but I certainly wouldn't have been here without you pioneering the comedy radio genre.
Well, I'm glad to help launch your career then.
You've launched many careers, including Weird Al's, and I do want to speak about that later, but
Sure.
I guess I kind of have a timeline I wanted to go through. I have some questions. I guess first, let's just get this out of the way. For those listening, where did the name Dr. Demento come from, and where did the idea for your radio show come from?
Well, it started out as a rare oldies show, and I found after a while that the more novelty records that I played, things like the Purple People Eater and Transfusion and They're Coming to Take Me Away, Ha-ha, to the Funny Farm. The more things like that I played, the more popular the show seemed to be. So I thought, well, I think I'm on to something, so I'm going to run with that. And the name came from a fellow named Steven Siegel, a.k.a. the obscene Stephen Clean. I happened to get to know him through some mutual friends, and he was a disc jockey in Pasadena, right outside Los Angeles, and he invited me to the station he was on, and that was favorably received. There were lots of calls saying, "Bring him on again," or things like that, and he gave me the name. He came up with the name Dr. Demento. If you ask him, he'll say that he first thought of it when he was hanging out with Peter Wolf, who was the lead singer of the Jay Giles band that was very popular for many years, and they were good friends. And so Stephen gives him part credit for thinking up the name.
And it just stuck. Did you start using it immediately?
It just stuck, yeah. Stephen started using it when he introduced me. Before I had my own show, I was a guest on his show quite a few times. It was kind of a regular thing. And about the fourth time I was on with him, he just said, "And now here's Dr. Demento." And it just stuck. He did not ask me first if I wanted to be Dr. Demento.
But you liked it. You liked the name?
Yeah.
Okay.
It stuck, yeah.
Yeah.
For better or worse, and mostly for better.
Now, I haven't heard of any other DJ before you playing the novelty comedy music strictly. Was there anyone that you had listened to or heard of before you started doing it?
Nobody really influenced me in terms of doing it. I just knew that I wanted to play records for people.
Right.
There were some people who played comedy records on the air before me. The best known, mostly in the Los Angeles area, was a guy named Hawthorne. He made a few records, so he's not totally forgotten, but he had a show in the 1940s and 50s where he played a lot of comedy records.
Oh, okay.
He played old stuff that was old then.
Right.
He also made some records of his own that were not national hits, but they're still around.
Now, when you started to transition from the rarities rock stuff into the novelty comedy stuff, were there any road bumps from program managers or program directors?
No, I was on a Freeform station.
Okay.
That was a brief era in the history of radio where even on commercial stations, just about anything went on certain stations. They called it underground radio, progressive radio, Freeform radio. There were lots of names for it. There were a few stations around the country. Probably the best known one on the East Coast was WBCN in Boston. And in our town, it was KPPC in Pasadena, and that's where I was lucky enough to catch on. And really, before management knew it, I'd kind of evolved to doing funny stuff. And as long as it got a good reaction and people listened, they were fine with it. So occasionally there would be objections to certain things that I played. Not very often, but it happened. But they certainly went along with the idea of playing funny stuff in general.
As far as other disc jockeys, did you have was there a lack of respect because you weren't playing, the typical stuff?
Not really.
You never ran into that?
No, I didn't feel it was something different and something that most of the people who tuned in, I mean, either they rejected it right away and went back to listening to Led Zeppelin, or they loved it. It seemed that way.
You started you were a DJ in college, in Portland, Oregon, Reed College.
That's right. So I became the station manager. It's a very small station. Reed is a relatively small college, and the station was not really a big deal, but a lot of people had fun with it, and I certainly did. When I started there, the station played mostly classical music.
Okay.
And during the time that I was there, it evolved to being a more freeform. Now, this was the early 60s, before there were any real freeform commercial stations. There were certainly some other wacky shows on college and non-commercial radio at that time. But basically, the Dr. Demento show developed in a vacuum. It evolved. The listeners I followed what the listeners wanted to hear. And there seemed to be a trend after a while in favor of the things that were called novelty records at that time, like the ones I just mentioned.
Right.
And I gradually expanded it to other forms of comedy that were on records, such as Tom Lehrer or Alan Sherman, and then Frank Zappa, of course. Of course, on that station, they played Frank Zappa all the time. It wasn't just me.
Right.
Because it was a crazy freeform station. And Zappa was just kind of launching his career, and he was based in Los Angeles, so we were all very much in touch with Frank Zappa and his fans.
Now, you first knew that you wanted to get into radio at a young age when you started collecting records?
Yeah, I started collecting records, and then at our high school, we would have record hops, sock hops, because we danced in the gym and they didn't want to mark up the floor with street shoes, so we danced in our socks. That was common at a lot of schools in those days, but we had our sock hops, and we had a relatively small high school, so the school did not bring in disc jockeys from the local AM top 40 stations. Instead, right. Students would bring their own records and play them. And when I got to be a junior, I by that time I had the biggest record collection, so I was usually the guy who played the records. And I didn't talk much. My talking was limited to dedications. We sold dedications for a dime.
Okay.
You could pay a dime, and I'd say, now for Bill and Judy, here's Confidential by Sunny Night. And that's about all the talking that I would do in those days. But in college radio, I got to do more talking, different things. We were a classical station, and now here is Beethoven's Symphony No. 4, Arturo Toscanini, and the NBC Symphony Orchestra, trying to be restrained and dignified. Right. And then I got to playing blues. I was a big blues fan, even back then, Muddy Waters and Jimmy Reed and that kind of thing. So I had a blues show, and then I had a folk music unlimited show. Wow. Because those were the days of the folk boom.
Right.
So, of course, everybody remembers who went through that era remembers the Kingston Trio and Peter, Paul, and Mary, but I tended to play more either people like Pete Seeger, or I would play real traditional music from the mountains and from the deep south. More and more of that was becoming available on records, so that's what I'd play. So that was me in college at KRRC, Reed College Radio. Mm-hmm. And I became the student manager of the station because I seemed to have more enthusiasm for it than the other kids did. So that was how I started in radio.
When you were a young boy around 12, you started collecting the 78s. Did you know what you were looking for, or were you kind of just experimenting, looking at cover art?
It was mostly trial and error. I knew a little bit. My mother had grown up in the 20s and 30s, and she remembered songs from that era, and she had told me about some of those. She bought me a book, The History of Popular Music in America, which was written in 1947. So it told the story of pop music from the 19th century up to that time, and I devoured that and started looking for some of the songs that were mentioned in that book. And I also had a couple of books about jazz, so I'd look for Louis Armstrong and Bix Beiderbecke and people like that, and occasionally find some. And I read what I could find about lots of different kinds of music. Nowadays, there is just so much information. You can learn just about anything you want to know about older music, but that was not true in those days before the internet. There were only a few books about older forms of pop music, blues and jazz, and most of them, frankly, were not that great, but you get a little idea of what was going on. And so I'd study that, and through trial and error, the Salvation Army sold 78s for a nickel apiece. And so I could afford, I usually spent about $1 a week at the Salvation Army, so that's 20 records. Plus, they'd give me ones that were cracked or real beat up or something like that. So it was trial and error. If I liked something, I looked for more that were like that.
Right.
So all kinds of music. There was popular, classical, semi-classical, and music from the various immigrant groups that had come in. Minneapolis, lots of Scandinavians and Germans and Poles, so I'd find music from those cultures.
Was that where you first were introduced to the novelty music, or did that come later on?
Oh, yeah, well, the first novelty records I had, there were two things. Spike Jones, he was very popular in the 1940s. He was a big band leader. He sold lots of records. He was famous. And so my dad brought home some records of Spike Jones. Those were certainly the first novelty records, the first funny records that I heard. Cocktails for Two and the William Tell Overture and so on by Spike Jones. And then you'd hear novelty songs on the radio. In the 40s, there was the Too Fat Polka by Arthur Godfrey, for instance, and The Thing by Phil Harris was huge in 1950 when I was 9 years old. Oh, you'll never get rid of the boom, 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 no matter what you do. And that was a novelty song that was very big. And then getting towards the rock and roll era, you had The Flying Saucer, 1956, The Purple People Eater in 58. At any given time in the 50s and through the first half of the 60s, there was generally at least one or two novelty songs on the radio in the current rotation at the top 40 station. Some were great, some were easily forgotten, but there were a lot of them coming out. And so I was introduced to those, and my classmates certainly enjoyed the Purple People Eater. So I became kind of a fan of those, along with all the other kinds of music I was interested in. So I knew that stuff, even though it never really went quite to the forefront of my imagination, of my thoughts in music, until the Dr. Demento show came along, till that came into being. But I was a big fan of rock and roll in general, especially the rootsier stuff, the R&B, the rockabilly from the 50s and 60s. So Sun Records and all that, and Chess Records. I got, my record budget finally got up to about $3 a week, late 50s.
Wow.
I usually buy one new record, which would more often than not be something by somebody like Muddy Waters or Jimmy Reed or John Lee Hooker. And then I spent my $1 at the Salvation Army and $1 at a place that sold records that had been taken off jukeboxes for 19 cents a piece. Got a lot of R&B from that place.
That's cool. You, after college, you graduated with a master's degree from UCLA. And
that's what brought me to Los Angeles.
Okay. And from there, you began working for a few different record labels, Specialty Records at first, and then Warner Brothers.
You have read my bio, Ethan.
I have.
Very good. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Yeah, Specialty Records worked there for 3 years, and it was during that time that the Dr. Demento show started. That's when I met Steven Seagal, Stephen Kleen, and began doing guest shots on his show on KRRC, and then they gave me my own Sunday night shift on KRRC. Then I moved over to KMET, which was a bigger, more commercial station, but by that time the Dr. Demento silliness format was fairly well established, and I was starting to get good ratings, so that I stayed KMET for quite a long time. Let's see, about 15 years.
So you were on the radio doing the Dr. Demento show and also working at a record company?
Yeah, I worked for Warner Brothers. I joined Warner Brothers in 1971, worked there till 79, doing a variety of behind-the-scenes type jobs.
Okay.
They put out my first album while I was there, but I also worked on lots of other albums, not necessarily comical at all. They had a program that they called The Lost Leaders. They put one or two of those out every year. It was a 2 LP set, which was a sampler of various new Warner Brothers releases. And you could buy them. They were mail order only, and it was $2 for the whole full-length 2 LP set, a double album, as they'd call them. And so each one would have maybe 25 or 30 cuts on it, and there'd be some big name artists. There'd be Fleetwood Mac and James Taylor and Neil Young, people like that, and then there'd be all the new artists that Warner Brothers was trying to establish. So I was given the job of picking the songs and putting them in order and writing notes.
Okay.
So that I was involved in a lot of different kinds of music through that, and it was fascinating. I enjoyed that work a lot. I also wrote commercials for them. I wrote stuff for little magazines that they put out. I wrote publicity blurbs of all kinds. I wrote ads for print. I wrote some ads that appeared on the radio, and so did lots of stuff. And Frank Zappa was with Warner's for part of that time, so got to do a little more work with him.
At what point did you start doing the radio show full time?
Well, the radio show kind of became, I'll say the radio show started paying enough so that I didn't need to do I didn't need to have a day job. That happened in 1979.
Okay.
So it took a while to build to the point where it could support me, because when I was just a guest on Stephen's show, it was for free, and then I started at $25 a week, and it gradually worked its way up.
Right.
So it worked its way up into 4 figures, so at that time I could support myself on it.
That was pretty early on, I guess, in your in having the show, the Dr. Demento show, that you met Al Yankovic. You spoke at his high school?
Right. I did not actually meet him at that time. He was, he would have been 13 or 14. And he said he was too shy to come up and meet me, but he was certainly impressed. And it was not long after that he started sending me tapes. And I liked the tapes. They were real good, so I put them on the show. And they got better and better, and he gradually got to be more and more famous. So, I mean, Al's early career grew in a series of slow steps. He didn't become famous overnight.
Right.
First it was my show, and then he put out My Bologna, which got on a few other stations. Another one, Rides the Bus, which got on more stations and made the bubbling under charts in Billboard magazine. And then he got on MTV, and that started really to make him a star. It happened bit by bit. Yeah.
He met John Bermuda Schwartz on your show. Was
That's
John
true? Yes.
Was John a comedy musician, or what was he doing there?
Yeah. He had a band too, and he'd made some comedy songs. He didn't make any commercial records at that time, but he made tapes, which he'd send to me, just like Al did. And it was just pure coincidence that I booked them both for the same show. Pure coincidence.
That's amazing.
And that happened to be, Al had just written the song Another One Rides the Bus. In fact, I'd spent some time with Al and a bunch of other people earlier that weekend, and he was just finishing up the lyrics to Another One Rides the Bus. He used to have a big blue loose-leaf notebook, and he would write lyrics in that. And so every so often we'd see Al sitting in a corner writing in that notebook, and what he was doing was writing the lyrics to Another One Rides the Bus.
Okay.
And so he came in to do his guest spot on my show. He'd been a guest on the show before. It wasn't his first time. But he said, "Oh, I've got a new song." And he showed me the lyrics so I could make sure that they weren't dirty or anything. Of course, I needn't have worried with Al, but in any case, so he said, "Can I do this song on the show?" And I said, "Yes, you can." So he went out into the corridor while I was just playing records, and he went out into the corridor and started rehearsing the song. And at that point, he started talking to John Bermuda Schwartz, and found out that John was a drummer, and asked him, "Well, why don't you bang on my accordion case and provide some rhythm?" So that's exactly what John did, and so that's how that performance went out over the air. And fortunately, we had a tape recorder rolling and recorded it in stereo on reel-to-reel tape, and that actual performance wound up being on Al's first album.
That's so incredible.
Yes.
It's such a great song too. It's amazing with Al's music how it holds up being a parody song
Right.
of a song that people may not even be familiar with nowadays. They can still listen to his older stuff and get a kick out of it.
That's right.
When did you start
He,
doing interviews on your show?
Oh, it was after a while. I mean, like Al would come in and I'd do like a brief interview with him or other artists like that. At first, it was just they'd do a song live and I'd ask him a few questions, and then after I started doing the network show, which was in '74, it was a bigger deal. I was with a syndication company, and so we really had more of a way of bringing in artists who had made a name for themselves. My first interview on the air, I think, that was like that would be Doodles Weaver, who was one of the stars of the Spike Jones band.
Okay.
He did the Fiedelbaum routine that was very famous with Spike Jones, and he was still around in 1973. So he came in, and I talked to him for some time on the show and played, of course, some of his famous records.
Mm-hmm.
And then after I got a different manager and went with Westwood One, which at that time was the biggest syndication company in radio, we started bringing in more guests at that time. So like I had George Carlin on 4 times. Oh, Frank Zappa was another one of the earlier ones.
Mm-hmm.
Had him on 4 times also. And
Wow.
So he was maybe the 3rd or 4th somewhat lengthy interview that I did was Frank.
Who was your most notable or your favorite interview, I guess?
Oh, I don't know. George Carlin was on 4 times, and he was always brilliant, though
Yeah.
Sometimes more serious than you might think, because I'd get on with George, and we start talking about what is funny, what makes comedy, and start analyzing it. That's just the way it happened to go with him. Probably the one interview that I was happiest with, how it turned out, was John Cleese.
Wow.
He came in, actually, that was not on the Dr. Demento show originally. That was on the morning show of the station that I was on at the time in Los Angeles. And he had come in to promote the movie A Fish Called Wanda. And somebody at the station got the idea, well, why don't we have Dr. Demento interview John Cleese? And so they called me about 2 nights before it happened and said, can you come in the morning show and talk to John Cleese? And I said, well, sure. So I did, and that just, it really went well. He had come just to talk about A Fish Called Wanda, and I had seen a screening of it, so I had some questions about that. But we quickly got to talking about his Monty Python career, and he was happy to do that. And he seemed impressed with how much I knew about Monty Python, and so it just went real well.
That's great. That's so great. Now, was Weird Al ever working on your show? I think I heard somewhere that he used to answer phones. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah. He was not like a paid employee or anything, but he would come in when he was living in Los Angeles, like during summers when he wasn't going to school.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say, well, you can come in and answer phones anytime you want. I mean, he wasn't a big star. He was just
Right.
somebody whose tapes I played on the show, and I knew he was real talented, but in no way was he a star yet. So he was happy to come in, and Barnes and Barnes came in too sometimes.
Oh, that's great.
And of course, the other people who were members of my crew, my first crew members who became well known, though just on my show, not nationally, Captain Chaos and Jungle Judy. So they were my first phone answerers, or at least my first that really became well known, and people began having fantasies about Jungle Judy, and she did a couple of appearances with me wearing a leopard skin suit, and so that was fun. And then Captain Chaos would dress up like a sea captain.
That's
Those were names that I just hung on them. I mean,
Oh, really?
It was Steve and Judy, and I decided I was Dr. Demento. They might as well have funny names too. So that's how they became Captain Chaos and Jungle Judy.
When did you start wearing your top hat?
Oh, it was let's see, I think it was the first time I went to the Grammys. And I
Okay.
needed to rent a tux, and my manager said, "Oh, you look great in that." So that's how it started.
Oh, that's great. It's become such an icon for your career.
Yeah.
Are you still doing interviews on your current iteration of the Dr. Demento show?
Not as much, but once in a while.
Yeah.
I mean, I do a lot of them on the phone using the same setup I'm using right now. That's how I do. That's how I've done an interview with Al Yankovic every time he's had a new album. So there was one for the new album too, the newest album. Mandatory fun.
Would you have ever expected all those years ago that Al would go on to have a #1 record?
Maybe not when he first started, but
Yeah.
like I said, his career progressed in steps, and every year he seemed to do something bigger and better and more spectacular than the year before. So it was a series of steps. So, and I was always happy and delighted with each one.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, at first there were the homemade tapes, and then there were the slightly more elaborate tapes, and then there started to be videos, and then he started directing his own videos and producing his own albums, and so the Weird Al thing just kept growing.
Now you still have the some of the earlier tapes, including the infamous Dr. D Superstar song.
Oh yes.
Are those ever? Are some of the ones that haven't been aired ever going to be out there? Is there any kind of plans to release them?
Well, we need to stop the interview right there, but we will be back on a future episode with the exciting conclusion to a very young Ethan Allman's interview with the legendary Dr. Demento.
I really hope everyone enjoyed hearing that. It is such a special interview to me, and I really look forward to you hearing the rest of it. Now, of course, Dr. Demento still has a weekly radio show, and it's available for you on his website, drdemento.com. So don't forget to sign up and check that out every week.
This is a special Hamster Alert to the Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast broadcast alert system, sponsored by Jack Bateman.
All right, Dave, this is our last chance to personally speculate on what's going to happen in Weird the Al Yankovic Story, because we're seeing the world premiere tomorrow night.
Yes, I am so very excited to see the world premiere, but why did you bring it up during the Hamster Alert?
Well, Dave, we all know that the most famous hamster of all is Harvey the Wonder Hamster. So I'm wondering, do you think Harvey will make an appearance in the movie?
Ooh, excellent question. You know, I did hear a rumor that the film does have at least 2 very special people who make a cameo, but I have not heard any rumors regarding cameos of the rodent persuasion.
Well, fair enough, but I just don't see how they could possibly not include Harvey somehow. He's almost as important to Weird Al's career as Dr. Demento was.
Well, Ethan, you know, that leads to a very interesting question. Who do you think would play the role of Harvey the Wonder Hamster in the film?
Well, duh, there's only one choice. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He should play every character in the film.
That is all for this episode's very important special Hamster Alert via the Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast broadcast alert system.
Oh, shucks. We've still got 4 more episodes of this dazzled nonsense. Let's get it out of the way.
This episode is brought to you in part by Discover Dazzle, promoting tourism in Dazzle, Minnesota. Not only is historic Dazzle, Minnesota a town, it also totally ripped off Twine Ball Days.
This past weekend, Dazzle, Minnesota hosted their 2022 Red Rooster Days.
Ooh, the professional wrestler?
No, Dave, that would actually be interesting. Instead, Red Rooster Days consisted of an 18-mile bike ride, a 7-mile bike ride, a parade, and a whole bunch of other crap nobody cares about.
I think that Dazzle is just jealous of Darwin because apparently there was also a Red Rooster Run, which is 5 miles long.
Ugh! Why would you want to run 5 miles when you only have to run 3.3 miles in the neighboring and much better town of Darwin with their Twine K race?
I know, right? And Red Rooster Days also held the largest chicken barbecue in the state. They're totally trying to upstage the Twine Ball.
I bet Dassel doesn't even have a makeshift pagoda.
So visit Dassel, Minnesota on your next expedition. You know, if you really must. And after you visit Dassel, Minnesota, we are obligated to mention that discoverdassel.biz is, also a website, I guess.
Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast is brought to you absolutely free thanks to our incredible sponsors, Burrito, Jackson Scoggins, Jack Bateman, and Mark Heidenreich, as well as the less than incredible Discover Dassel.
Our podcast is also supported by everyone in our Patreon family, with special thanks to our amazing close personal friend level Patreon supporters. Rim Jams Jared and Rocky, Javier, Nancy, NES Josh 64, Gus and Alicia, Jake, UH Jeff, Kenneth, Scott, Zeb, Adriana, Ajax, Allison, Blair, Matthew, Mike, and also thanks to William and everyone in our pretty stinking majestic Patreon family.
If you enjoy our freakishly fantastic, family-friendly, wonderful, wild and wacky Weird Al podcast, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/2000inch. There are also awesome benefits like getting your name on the podcast, your own private RSS feed, and access to secret episodes. And now would be a great time to join if you have not already, because you'll be the first to hear the unfortunate return of the ridiculously self-indulgent, ill-advised vanity tour concert review bonus episodes.
And don't forget to check out our official merchandise over at shop.2000inch.com for all your Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast merchandise needs. We love hearing from our listeners and other Weird Al fans, so be sure to join our Facebook community at group.2000inch.com and then visit our Discord server for even more riveting Weird Al and Red Rump the Goody related conversations. You can find both of them linked on our website, as well as information about past episodes and guests over at weirdalpodcast.com or 2000inch.com.
And while you're there, click on ridiculously self-indulgent bonus episodes to follow along with our adventures on tour, including ridiculously self-indulgent bonus episode 27 centimeter, when we finally visit the magic, majestic Darwin, Minnesota, and the biggest ball of twine in Minnesota. Or click on Black and White and Weird All Over bonus episodes for our special series where author John Bermuda Schwartz walks us through his first book, page by page and picture by picture.
Keep up on new episodes, podcast news, and events by following at 2000inch on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And thank you for subscribing and leaving reviews on your favorite podcast app. Make sure you are subscribed, because not only does it help the podcast, it brings us even closer to solving the mystery surrounding President Kennedy's terrible assassination.
And don't forget, we love it when we receive voicemail via our official patent-pending 27-hour-a-day podcast hotline, 347 Spatula. It's really that number, and yes, you might even hear your message on a future episode.
Thank you once again to this episode's guest, joining us all the way from 2015, the incredible, legendary Dr. Demento. We also want to thank Alternative to Sleeping with Ethan Ullman, WCDB 90.9 FM in Albany, New York, Comedy Pipe Radio, Ethan Ullman, Javier Valdez, Catherine Belia, Grammy Award-winning Jim Kimo West, and Ethan's grandma. And from all of us here at Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast, a huge congratulations to Chad and Laura Kelson, a.k.a. Metal Al and Metal Wife.
Thank you to the Grammy Award-winning Jim Kimo West for our incredible podcast theme song, and thank you to Weird Al Yankovic, as this podcast probably would not exist without him. And a big thanks to all of you, our loyal listeners, subscribers, Patreon supporters and sponsors, and everyone else who makes our podcast possible.
Thank you, as always, for choosing Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast. And until next time, remember to gill and chill.
So tell me, Dave, what do you think this big, mysterious Jim Kimo West announcement is?
To be honest, I think he secretly wrote a brand new version of our theme song, and it is way too pretty stinking majestic for him to release it. So now he's having second thoughts, and he's trying to come up with something new to announce instead.
Wait, you don't think this has to do with the Kennedy assassination, do you?
That was Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast, episode 171-inch.
Not your grandma's Weird Al podcast.
Hi, this is Dr. Demento, and you're listening to Ethan Ullman on WCDB 90.9 in Albany. Don't forget to stay demented.